Hi there, I'm Julie Sanford with Studio JSD in Grand Haven, Michigan, and I'm here at Halstead, and I'm here to show you how to make a ring. So you're going to need a few things. You're going to need your ring sizers. You'll need some kind of a caliper or a measuring tool. We've got some cutting tools, files, some pliers to bend the ring around. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. The first way is going to be using the math and doing it with just basic tools that you already have at home. Let's say I want to make a size 7, and we're going to be making this first ring out of just round wire. And okay, so we've got the ring size, and now I need to measure the diameter of this ring. So I'll take out my digital caliper. I am going to turn it on and then make sure it's set to 0. It's all the way closed. It's set to 0. And I am going to use this end of the caliper. See how it opens this way. This end of the caliper measures the inside of things. So I'll just put that in there like that, pull it out, and the inside is 17 millimeters. So I'm going to just jot that down. 17 millimeters. And now I need to measure the thickness of the metal that I'm going to be using. And this one is a 1.6 millimeter. So I'm going to put 1.6. This is going to be plus 1.6. So I'm going to add those two things together, which is going to give me 18.6. And I'm going to take 18.6 and I'm going to times that by 3.14. So I'll use the calculator for that one. So 18.6 times pi 3.14, and that gives me 58.4 millimeters. So this wire, if I measure at 58.4 millimeters, is going to get me a size 7. To measure this out, the first thing I want to do is I want to true this end of the wire up. So right now it's kind of got a rough cut on it, and I'm just going to file that so it's really flush and flat on the end. And then I am going to close my caliper, make sure it's at 0, and then slide this out to, what did I say, 58.4. And then I'm going to turn the screw on the digital caliper just to lock that in place so I don't bump that measurement out of place. All right. And I'm going to put one end of the caliper against the end that I just finished, and I'm going to use the other end to scribe a mark on the wire like that. And I will use a flush cutter, and I will make sure the flush side of this cutter, which is the flat side, not this angled side, I'll make sure that flat side is on the line facing the material that I'm cutting off, like that. And that gives me a fairly clean end. I'm still going to clean that up a little bit more with a file. And then the next step for making this ring is just to bring those ends around so those so they meet together in a nice tight flush way. So right now I have these non-marring nylon jawed round nose plier. I'm just bending this around. And right now it doesn't matter if it's round, and it's actually better if it's kind of straight in the middle so that when those two ends meet, there's not a gap. So that's close, but it's not perfect. So I'm just going to continue to just bend this in and turn these ends in until they're meeting together in a nice tight way. Now you shouldn't see any light through that gap, so I'm going to just fiddle with this a little bit. Sometimes you need to just kind of push it side to side, give it a little bit of tension so that when it's in its resting state, it's together and holds together, because we're going to be soldering this, so we need it to just have that tension so it stays together. And this one is ready to solder. Now let me show you another way to measure that. So you can find downloadable charts. Sometimes if you have any metalsmithing books, sometimes there's charts in the backs of them. But this is just a really cool cheat sheet that you can use, and it is going to show you like the thickness of the metal across the top of the graph and along the side of the graph. It's got the finger size. So what you can do is just find that finger size and slide it over to the thickness of your metal. So the next ring I am going to make is this thicker half round wire. And we do need to know the thickness of this metal. So I will grab those digital calipers and I'm going to figure out what that is. So this is a 1.95. So we could pretty much call that a 2 millimeters. So if I'm looking at my chart, I can see that the 2 millimeter row is here. And let's say I want to make a size, I'll make this one a size 8. So that's 62.8. So now I'm going to take my digital caliper and I'm going to make sure it's set at 0 when it's closed. Draw this out to 62.8. I already filed the end of this, so it's got a nice flush end on one side, and I am going to just use this tool to scratch that line. This one is a really thick wire, so I'm not going to be using my delicate little wire cutters, my flush cutters, to cut that. I'm actually going to be using the saw. So I've got my line marked, scribed right on there. I'll take my saw, just cut it through. I'm just kind of using my fingernail to guide that saw to make that first little cut. Cutting it as straight across as I can, because if I cut it at an angle and then need to file it straight from there, then I could be losing some material. So there's that end, and this is the end that I just cut. Looks really straight. There's a tiny little burr on that one end. So I'm just going to take this file, clean that up just a little, and now I can bend this around and get this one ready to solder. I like to do it from side to side, so I bend one side around and then I take it and bend it from the other side. It gives me a little bit more leverage, and then I can bring it together in the middle like that. So now the seam is really tight and I am ready to solder these together. All right, I've got my solder area all set up. I did want to mention too that if you're having trouble bending this around, like maybe you've got a lot of texture on there or something, you might need to anneal this first. So it makes it easier, and it's a lot more bendy to bring it around. I'm going to be soldering these together with medium solder. If you're making these as they are and you're not going to be putting any embellishments, you're not going to be soldering anything else to this, you could probably get away with using easy solder. If you're going to be putting a lot of embellishments on this, you might even want to use hard solder. But for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just going to be using medium. That way, if we do want to add anything else to it later, we can do that with easy solder. So I am going to flux the whole ring because this is sterling silver. And that just keeps the oxidation away, keeps the fire scale at bay. And so I'm going to just take a couple of pallions for the small ring, and maybe these pallions are really small. These little pieces of solder are really small, so I might put 3 on the big one. I'll put 2 on the little one. We can always add more if it doesn't look like it's gone all the way through. This bigger one's going to need extra. I usually just put my rings on the solder pad like this, and I don't put them in a third hand or anything. I just kind of set them up this way, but you could, kind of set it up any way that you want to. So I've got a solder pick handy just in case I need to reposition those little pieces of solder. So turning the torch on, and I've got just kind of a medium flame. It's not, super aggressive. It's not too soft. I'll do the small one first. And what I like to do is I like to have my elbow up, and that keeps the flame a lot more directional. If I have my elbow down, it's kind of skating across the surface, and I like it to come straight down on the surface. That way I can tell if I'm heating it evenly or not. And I just circle this a little bit. I heat it from the other side first, and what we want to heat up both sides of that seam at the same rate. If one side gets to the solder melting point before the other, the solder's just going to jump over to the one side and it's not going to flow in the seam. So I am really trying to make sure that both sides of that seam come to the temperature at the same time, and it's starting to melt and it looks like it's going right down the center. So now I can just go right across, back and forth, and flow that down into the seam. I'm going to throw this in the quench, and then I'm going to come across and do this one. Now this one's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to take more heat because it's a bigger piece, and I will just spend a little extra time going around this back side, trying to keep it as equally heated as I can. And then once I feel like the back side, so now the color of the metal is starting to lighten up. There we go, it's starting to flow. Once it starts to flow and flash a little, then I just go right into the seam and just make sure it flows all the way through the seam. And that is soldering them together. The next step is pickling them, getting them nice and clean, and then I'll show you how to make them round. Okay, now we have these pieces. They're clean, they've been pickled. They're not going to fit your finger really well because they're very misshapen. So let's go ahead and make these round. What I've got here, I've got round mandrel, ring mandrel, and then I have that rawhide mallet. So to reshape these, we're just going to push this down on the mandrel as far as we can get it, and then we'll take the mallet and we'll just kind of hit it all the way around and push it down again. Hit it around, push it down again. And I'm hitting this, just kind of tapping it around like this. I'm not pushing it down the mandrel this way. You only want to push it down the mandrel this way if it's too small and you want to stretch it. So right now I'm just kind of making it round and knocking the bumps out of it. And right now it is falling right at a size 7. So if I push it this way, it's just going to grow, and then it'll be 7 1/4 before I know it. So if you do want to stretch it, that is what you would do. But if I want to leave it at a size 7, I'm going to leave it the way it is. I do have one little problem with this though. It's not really straight. There's like a little wiggle, there's a little wave in there. So you could just take your mallet on a bench block and smack it down like that, so it's nice and level, and that is how you make it round again. The larger one is just going to take a little bit more muscle to push it down and to hit it with a mallet. And you could rest your mallet against your bench so you have a little bit more stability. And let's see what size this is. This is sitting right at a size 8, which is where we want it. If you have a really wide ring, you're going to want to flip it around on the mandrel, because otherwise it's going to conform to this taper and your ring is going to have a taper to it. This isn't super wide, but I just wanted to mention that. If it's much wider than this, you're going to need to just kind of straighten that ring up a little bit. And that's how you would make it round again. So if you want to, well, you should, you can finish this any way that you want to and give it any kind of a finish. But what you'll really need to do is go back in at the seam and just kind of clean up that seam. If there's any jaggedy edges, if there's any solder pooling, you can just file that off. And to get the inside, we use like a half round file, and you can get the inside. You could use rotary tools for this. We could use these barrel sanders. These are great for getting in and sanding the insides of rings. You could use the bristle discs to sand the insides of rings. These also work great to get those file marks off of the edge. So that's just a little bit of finishing. You could also tumble these if you have a tumbler, but that is making rings. Again, I'm Julie Sanford with Studio JSD in Grand Haven, Michigan, and you're with Halstead Jewelry Supply, and I hope you enjoyed this video.